welcome to part 2 of Positive Discipline. A couple quick reminders, especially for the people online. Always feel free to chime in with questions, comments. We may be moving a little bit quickly through things because we have a lot to do in a short period of time. But still, chime in. Even if you have a question that pertained to something we asked earlier, it'll be good for people online to be part of the discussion also. So today the plan is to kind of pick up where we left off last week. So for those of you who are here, there was some things we covered last week which we won't be talking too much about today. There'll be a little bit of review, but we'll pick up today with talking about the mistaken goals. That's something we talked a little bit about last time, but we'll go into it in a little bit more detail today. And then we'll go through some of the other tools and strategies and skills within the positive discipline model. And then towards the end, we'll leave time to go around and maybe talk about specific circumstances, situations, and specific questions that you guys have. So for the sake of getting through some of the information, we'll kind of designate some time at the end to get into that. Of course, if you have a pressing question or something that's very relevant and you want to chime in with it, feel free. But otherwise, we'll kind of save some time at the end to get into some specifics.
Before we start, Jason, I would like to say for the new people that are watching that I'm very happy that Dr. Jason Rodker is here at the Cottage School, and for the 4th time this year, right?
Yeah, something like that.
It's the 4th workshop, and so the plan is for next year to do 4 workshops on positive discipline, because we realized that 2 workshops are not enough, but we're going to try to fit as much information as we can in 1 hour, and then leave the last half hour to review the homework.
Right.
But I'm not sure if you want to talk about your bio a little bit for the new.
Okay, I'll bore you with a little bit of my background very quickly because we have more important things to get to. But and one other thing I'm going to be conscious of, I was told by someone who was watching online last week that what I'm doing right now, having my face to the computer, is a little bit distracting for people online because I seem disconnected. So I will attempt to keep my focus here, but I will be using the computer just as a little bit of a guide. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm currently working in private practice, mostly with kids and teenagers. Families also, obviously parents become part of the work when I'm working with kids. Prior to that, I worked for a handful of years in different school settings, public schools, alternative schools. Prior to that, I was working in places like community mental health centers, especially during my training. I was working in community mental health centers with very young children and families. I worked at a community mental health center in East Orange, so there I was working with kind of underprivileged kids. So that's a little bit about me. So, infused into my perspective on positive discipline is, in everything that I talk about here at the school, always infused is my understanding of kind of child development. And so I think it's really important whatever topic we're talking about, whether it's play or creativity or any of the other topics that we discussed last week. A couple weeks ago was bullying we were talking about. My thoughts on these issues are always coming from a place of and a respect for child development and what the needs of children are at different developmental stages. And so that also, factors into my perspective on positive discipline. So anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that's important to mention. And we've been doing these workshops for about 15 years in the school. I have to say that in every workshop, I personally have learned so much from the parents and from thinking about, okay, what's the best solution for an issue, right? And maybe today you will not find the solution, but it's something that, you can keep working on that because it takes a while and it takes practice to be able to do, to discipline the children in a positive way.
Yeah. And not every skill we talk about is going to work for everyone. So one thing that Laura and I were talking about earlier is how important it is to be creative in our interventions with kids. So kind of as long as you kind of take with you a sense of the underlying philosophy behind positive discipline and you're kind of operating from that place, you can feel free to kind of be creative and come up with your own interventions, with your kids. Don't feel like you have to use any of these tools in a formulaic kind of way. So take with you what works and what resonates with you, and whatever doesn't seem to fit with your parenting philosophy or who you are or your family situation, just kind of let that go. Don't feel like you have to use everything here. So let's start by reviewing some of these mistaken goals. Last week we were talking about the underlying motivation behind children's behavior and some of the mistaken goals that children sometimes form regarding their desire to belong and to connect with people. Sometimes kids develop mistaken goals about how to go about achieving that sense of belonging and connection with others. So the 4 mistaken goals are undue attention, power, revenge, and assumed inadequacy. So we'll quickly kind of go through each one of those. So basically the thought behind undue attention is that I only belong, I only matter, I'm only meaningful when I am noticed. So unless I'm constantly noticed, I don't belong. For power, the underlying belief is that I'm only meaningful, I only belong when I'm in control. So for the child with the mistaken goal of power, they're looking for control. And control is important for all kids to some degree, for all of us. We all need to feel some degree of control over our lives. And especially for children, it's sometimes hard for them to feel that sense of control because they're young, because they're so reliant on adults, because they don't get to make the rules. It's very easy for kids to feel out of control. So it's not that needing or wanting control is a bad thing, but for the child with the mistaken goal of power, it becomes their primary way of relating, is that they always have to be in control and be the one with the power. For revenge, I only matter as long as I can kind of get back at those who have hurt me. Or I don't, I don't belong, so I'll hurt others as I feel hurt. So that's it's pretty obvious what revenge means for these kids. So if a child is continually punished, we've talked a lot about punishment last week, and we'll talk more about it tonight. For a child who has been parented mostly through punishment, that's a child who may develop the mistaken goal of revenge. They may seek revenge against those who have wronged them,
And I have to say, sometimes it doesn't happen right away, the revenge.
Right.
But all the issues that we don't work now during early childhood and then, elementary school age will show up when they're teenagers. And then you have, talking about control, you almost don't have any control about it, okay? Because they really pay attention only to peers when they're teenagers. So the parents go to a second, their teachers don't take them into account almost anymore, right? During those teenager years. So the revenge then will take place during the teenage years many times.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, the things we do early on, right, they don't always show their obvious effects until different later stages in development. So
some of them you can see some kids rebelling, when they're little, but then if they are raised with punishments and rewards, which is the other way of disciplining children, which is the most commonly used, then they will accumulate those feelings too, and when they are teenagers, all of them will show up. Either they are in adequacy or actually all of them.
Yeah.
All of them.
Right.
The 4 mistaken goals will show up in intensity.
So again, like we said last week, be aware of what works, right?
Yes.
Because what appears to work for a young child, if they're responding to a lot of reward and punishment as a young child, okay, but later on when they're a teenager, get ready for some rebellion, eventually, because they're going to have to react to it at some point. Right?
Yeah, so what we explained last class was that punishments and rewards are very, really work for the moment, but not in a long term.
Right.
Positive discipline works on the long term.
And for assumed inadequacy, the underlying belief behind that mistaken goal is I don't believe I can belong, so I'll convince others not to expect anything of me. So a child with this mistaken goal kind of takes on the helpless stance. Oh, I can't do it. They'll give up on themselves, and they'll wait for an adult to come in and do for them. And that's how they get the feeling of being meaningful and connected and belonging. So did you want to use the chart at all? Did you have something in mind for using the chart at this point? Or did you want to just keep going through?
We can use it if anyone did the homework of the questionnaire, if anyone had the time to do that we gave to you last, during the last workshop, then we'll use it at that point, I think.
Okay.
We can finish
So
the
we'll wait till the end.
PowerPoint and
Okay.
then.
So we'll kind of breeze through a little bit some of the strategies and tools. We talked a lot about kind and firm last week, so I won't get into that too much. But it's important that as you think about positive discipline and as you listen to us share our thoughts on positive discipline, that you don't get the impression that the positive part is all about being easy and permissive and always, overly gentle. It is important to be kind, but it's also important to be firm. You don't have to choose one or the other. So positive discipline really is about not being overly permissive or overly rigid, controlling, harsh. So to be both. Focusing on solutions rather than punishment. So just to give us a very small example, let's say a child is spills something, knocks something over, they were doing something they weren't supposed to be doing, and as a result they made a mess. Rather than coming down with a punishment, you weren't supposed to be doing that, and so now you can't have whatever, or now you weren't supposed to be doing that, you made a mess, so now go to timeout. So rather than a punishment, approaching that child with, well, a mistake has been made, but it's an opportunity for problem solving, right? So, well, there seems to be a mess here. What can we do about this? So, like we talked about last week, using curiosity questions, that's a tool you could use in this situation. Focusing on solutions and asking the child to come up with a potential solution to that problem in that moment. What can we do about this? Oh, it needs to be cleaned up. What can we use to clean it up? So letting them really be the one to come up with the ideas and fix it. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And train them too. Take the time to train them, right? If they need
Yeah.
some training to learn how to do something, then we can help them.
Exactly. So as frustrated as we may be in moments like that, as angry as we may be in moments like that, as much as we may want to be punishing in that moment, kind of holding on to those feelings, and if training needs to be done, if help and support needs to be provided, then providing that until they learn to do it for themselves, right?
Especially with the little ones that they imitate everything.
Yeah.
So in that case, you can show them, look, this is one way to fix
Right.
it. You can clean it up.
Right.
And they love to help when they're 2, when they're 3.
Yeah.
They love to do that.
Yeah.
Do you ignore, so like our daughter sometimes will do it in spite, like she'll look right at us with a smile and go like this with all of her food, and then just look at us and wait for the reaction. So should you just like pretend that it was an accident and she's not doing it just to spite you, and just go into, well, look, there's a mess, like, what can we do about this? Should you ignore that emotional aspect where you kind of want to be like, come on, like, why, you did that on purpose?
So for that, we can use the chart. If you want, we can work on that now, or should we finish the PowerPoint and then go back to the question?
Yeah.
Because we're gonna go around
actually.
Because we can use the chart actually for that particular.
We can. Let's save that for a little later,
Okay.
and we'll specifically go through that example,
Okay.
and we'll use the chart. Yeah. Just to briefly give some kind of an answer to that. It's still an opportunity. It really partly, I think, depends on how emotionally reactive you are feeling in that moment. And if you're feeling too reactive to be helpful or be effective in that moment, then maybe that's not the moment to address it,
Okay.
If you're calm enough to address it in that moment, maybe just go right to this, you could maybe just go right to this, finding a solution,
Okay.
but we'll get more into it. Family meetings, would you like to talk a little bit about family meetings now?
My dog, and when we had the family meeting that worked for 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
I can tell that story.
Yeah.
So, family meetings, we do class meetings too here in the school. When there is a situation that we see is going around in the group and everybody pretty much is involved in that situation, in that conflict, then we tell the children that we have to have a meeting. So they already know that, and we'll sit down on the floor. Or we'll put the meeting on the agenda. We'll say, we're going to have a meeting after lunchtime, let's say. And that's something you can do at home too. If it's something that you don't find solutions right away, or you don't have the time right away to find a solution, or it's something that it's been going on for a long time, it's a great tool to have these family meetings, because you get everybody in the family involved, you set a time, and from the child's point of view, it looks like it's something very important that we're going to talk about, because we did this whole setup of the meeting, right?
Mm.
So then you put in the agenda for the meeting whatever you need to talk about. I remember having a family meeting. My kids already knew about positive discipline, so they already said before even I mentioned that, I said, are you doing a family meeting? Yes, we can call it a family meeting, but I was saying no to have a dog, right? We had a dog before in a farm. We had not a good experience with a terrier free in a farm, because it was hurt by a horse, a whole drama, right? So for 5 years or 4 years, they said no more dogs in the house. So they insisted that there was this Cocker Spaniel that somebody couldn't have, and they came back with that. You know how kids are, right? Very insistent about this dog, and I kept saying, I'm not going to get into that. We're not having a dog again. When you have your own house and you make your decisions, then you could think about another dog. So anyway, we have Sally, and we adore Sally. We have her today. But in that family meeting, we were talking about it, and I said why I was concerned of, what was my reason of not having a dog in the house. So they could hear that, what was my point. And one of the points was that I didn't really want to have taken to more tasks, right? Because we're so busy, I was busy, they were busy too with school stuff. But how are we going to share the task, the responsibility of having a dog in the house? And so we did a chart, and I was not involved into the giving a bath to the dog, right? That was the part that I was not going to take any responsibility. And it's been 10 years, and I have to say that worked. I haven't given her a bath ever. I never, right? It's always Juana or Francisco, if he comes from Cottage, will give Sally a bath, and that's how it works. So they took it, I think, very seriously, and we finally said, okay, we're going to have the dog, but we share the tasks, the responsibilities, and it really worked.
Yeah,
it worked.
so
It worked and I think they still remember the meeting. So if there is something
right.
important that you really want to sit down and discuss, I think that's a great tool to have.
Yeah. And the focus of the family meetings is on opening up a dialogue and having the children chime in with their thoughts about how to solve some of these issues that come
That's
up.
right. Yeah. So they said no problem. We can do the bath part of it.
At what age
the
do you
dog
guys have
bath.
those family meetings?
At
what age?
Well, this
can
is
start with
so
that.
Sally is 10, right? And we
I guess
got
I
her when
can
she was 2.
verbalize.
That's why I do the numbers now for the time.
Yeah.
So it's 8 years ago, and so Francisco was 12, and Juana was 20. So Juana was about to leave for college. Yes, maybe in the last 2 years of high school.
Yeah.
So
But
yeah,
you-
they were older, but still, you can use family meetings for little things. Not as big as an issue as having.
And also, when kids are much younger, you can start having family meetings. How
You
old-
can,
you can,
yes.
right? I mean,
Yeah,
as
so-
long as kids can verbalize, like you said, as long as they're old enough to verbalize, you can begin having family meetings.
Yes.
Jane Nelson talks about having weekly family meetings built into like the routine. So a Sunday night meeting or whatever, but having it be kind of a routine part of your
That's
your
right.
weekly schedule. But in the example you're bringing up, you can also use a family meeting for
For
kind of
one-
a one-time
yeah,
issue.
one
Something
time.
comes up, okay, we're holding a family meeting. And those family meetings are not for the parents necessarily to just kind of give their list of complaints. This is what's been going wrong. You guys need to fix this. This needs to change. It's about bringing something up which presents an issue for the family, and everyone talking about their personal part, in that, and what they can personally do to help kind of resolve the issue.
And actually, they took it seriously in this case. And kids do take things seriously. They do want to help. Remember that they want to feel that they are needed, that they have a part in the family, that they belong to the family, which is one of the core, right? Belonging and significance. That's what they want to feel. They keep that in mind because they do want to feel that. And so I think you have used also family meetings, right, Laura, for some of the stuff at home.
I've tried.
You try.
I've tried. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I think when I say I've tried, I just feel like I haven't made it consistent, but it does work. It
Like
does
a
work.
weekly
Yes,
meeting?
I haven't made it consistent like a weekly. It's
Mhm.
more, which I think is more important because then, because it's supposed to be positive. There's not necessarily an issue every time you sit down,
Right.
correct?
Right.
That shouldn't it, right?
There doesn't always have to be an issue.
It doesn't
right?
have to be an
No.
issue,
Right.
and I feel like that's where I falter a little bit. Like if there's an issue, we call one.
Right.
But it does work, and because then it really, they do start to think. You know, Leo.
Yeah,
so-
to look for
because
solutions, right?
when you first
Mm.
start talking, he'll say, I don't know. I called a family meeting about the morning routine chart from last week. That remember you suggested, that I do
Yep.
that, and at first it was met with a little bit of resistance, but then as soon as he realized it wasn't about what he was doing, it was about what I was doing, he was full of ideas.
And they have all these ideas that you cannot believe sometimes. They're
It was
like
good.
really, yes.
I forgot to carry it in. It was pretty good. I'm gonna show it to you, but yes,
So if you
think
want
they
to
work.
share the example, then we can.
yeah.
Yeah, and the meetings don't have to be long. Even a 10,
Right.
15-minute meeting, sometimes is enough.
I think that was the threshold.
That was the key. Yeah. Yeah.
The shortness.
Right.
And that depends on the age also. So
Yeah.
with the little kids, you want to have short
Right.
talks, short meetings. They don't have the attention for more.
Right. Giving limited choices, another positive discipline tool. So even for even for Liam, even for a very young child, a 2-3-year-old child, you can begin to allow, again, in light of trying to give children a sense of having some amount of control or some amount of decision making, and to help them also exercise their decision making capability, right? Providing limited choices sometimes. So for a very young child, 2, 3, 4 years old, maybe just giving 2 choices. Would you like to wear this or would you like to wear this, right? For an older child, they would, it would
I
be
would keep
appropriate
it
to
in
give
2.
more choices. You would even keep it 2 for an older
Yes.
child. Okay.
Many choices is very stressful. And
Yeah.
actually, there are great talks, TED Talks about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's stressful to have many choices. You
Even
have to keep that in mind.
even for
older
teenagers?
kids, yes. Just
Yeah,
to have 10 choices for college, 10 choices, it's just a lot. It's a lot for them
Right.
too. It's a lot for us.
Right.
And it's a lot for them.
Right.
So maybe 3, let's say, for older kids.
Right.
But I wouldn't think that it has to be unlimited.
Right.
Because it actually produces more stress.
You can I sometimes even like to reframe limits in terms of choices. So rather than just presenting a limit, reframing it for the child and having them still feel like they have a choice, even though
Oh, yes.
they're not getting what they want, they still have a choice. So last night Liam wanted,
Yes.
it was late, he wanted juice, and I didn't want him having some sugar, right before bed. But I was offering him something else. I was offering him water. He was, I don't want water, I want juice. I said, well, you have a choice. You can have water, or you can choose not to have water. There's still a choice. And in his mind, letting him know,
Yes,
you
of
still have a
course.
choice. You can
You
choose
give
to have
him
the
the
water, or
power.
you can choose not to
Use
have the
that
water.
one.
Well, actually, that's what they want. They want to have the power to
Yeah, exactly,
choose.
exactly.
For sure.
Right.
Yes. So that's the
So
idea
That
of
one
the
comes
choice.
up a lot for us.
It doesn't. It's a little tricky, maybe a little sneaky, but not really.
Genius.
You're still setting the limit, right? So establishing routines. We talked about this last week. If you establish routines, then you don't always have to be the enforcer. Laura and I, we were talking about this earlier today. You can almost be like, it's not up to me, it's up to the schedule. This is just the routine. So when the limit then gets set, it's not so much parent against child power struggle happening. It's, well, this is the routine, this is the schedule.
Go check the chart.
Go check the chart, right?
That's why timers are good. You blame it on the timer.
There you go. Yeah, exactly.
Timers,
there you go.
yes.
Yep.
Anne actually just commented,
Okay.
and she says choices are hard for even adults.
They are.
Okay, there you
yeah,
go.
actually, there
Yeah.
are great talks in TED if you want to. I think I have sent the link a long time ago, but
Yeah.
there are a couple that are really good. How stressful it is to have many choices.
A good example is if you're overseas and you're used to going to a grocery store in other countries, and then you come to America and
Yeah.
come to the grocery
I
store
was just
here.
thinking that.
Well,
You're like,
I actually gave that example in one of the workshops
Yeah.
of the choices of the tomato sauce that you could find in a store here. I would stand up
It takes me like an hour.
Yeah.
I could not believe how many choices, and then I grew up in a house where my mother made her own tomato sauce, right, from peeling the tomatoes after boiling them. So I'm like, what should I get? So I got tomato paste sometimes because I didn't know what it was, right? So that was why you may have the experience, in Argentina, coming to the supermarket here. It is stressful, but it's all, they've done some research on that actually, and it's interesting to see.
Yeah, it's true.
So 2 choices is enough to have them feel powerful. Maybe 3, 2 and a half.
Right, 2 and a half. Yeah, exactly. All right, let's see. Try to keep my face away from the screen, but let me just click over here. Okay, so mistakes as opportunities for learning. I mean, this is a concept we talked about last week, and it's pretty fundamental to positive discipline. When a mistake is made, it's not something to be, admonished for. It's not necessarily something to be punished for. Adults, we make mistakes, and I think it's really important that we, as the parents, model for our kids that when we make a mistake, we can acknowledge the mistake and move on from it. That we, move into when appropriate, that we move into problem solving rather than blaming ourselves or feeling guilty. And also, if it's a mistake that we make that we feel requires an apology, that we make an apology. We often do things, say things to our kids that we regret, that we wish we hadn't done or said, and it's okay to make an apology. It's really good modeling. Yeah. Positive timeout. We didn't talk too much about this last week, so maybe we'll talk about this a little bit right now. So, getting back to the example you were giving earlier, and the thought that it sparked for me, which is that if in the moment we are too heated, really too emotional, too reactive to respond in an effective, positive way, sometimes modeling taking space is a really important thing to do. So timeouts not being just for children, but for us as well. So right now I'm feeling too angry to speak with you, appropriately right now. So I'm going to go take some space. I'll come back when I feel more ready to talk. If, saying that to a child is modeling for them exactly the kind of skill we want them to develop, which is the ability to notice their emotional reaction and do something about it, and then come back when they're feeling, more ready. So rather than imposing a timeout, just modeling what that process is like, what that means.
And we did mention last time that you can create your own positive timeout space for yourself and for the child. The child can help you create, or the child can create actually, the space for a positive timeout. We've talked about even the bathroom could be a space for you to have a positive timeout. Remember, we mentioned that. It could be.
I've been doing it.
You do it, right?
Because I go to the bathroom all the time anyway, so it's not strange that I would go in. So it really works. It really does. And that was Jason's idea. That is a good one. Yeah, because, sometimes I don't want to announce that I'm sometimes I just need to walk away because nobody's really doing anything wrong, right? It's how I'm interpreting the situation.
Point on the bathroom positive timeout from Jane Nelson too. So that you can bring your books. Remember, we talked about that. You can bring your books there, and as long as you tell the child, this is my space for a positive timeout, and you are also modeling for them, then they can create a positive timeout space. You have a book right for that.
Yeah, this is
somewhere else in the house.
This is a book called Jared's Cool. It could be Jane too. Could be, but it's Jared's Cool Out Space. So it's a kid-friendly book about creating a timeout space at home, and the part that my son gets a kick out of is the very last page where the dad is in the timeout space. he really gets it. Yeah, so in this book, the kid, the mother and the child create this space in the boy's room, which is kind of like outer space. It's an outer space area where he can go to, and he gets in the box, and it's a spaceship, and it's a place for him to just go and feel relaxed and calm and peaceful. So I think sometimes people have trouble wrapping their heads around the fact that a timeout area can be something that helps a child to feel good, and actually that a child might enjoy going to it, as if it gets back to that idea that some of us have ingrained, which is that in order for a child to do better, they need to feel worse. They need to feel the consequences of their actions. So sending them somewhere where they might enjoy being would not be the right thing to do. But if our goal is to teach a child how to get their emotions in check and feel good enough to come back and engage positively and feel motivated and feel encouraged to do better, why not?
I think that's the
you know.
key part, the most important part for people to understand positive discipline. If they understand that part, that the child needs to feel better, that a misbehaving child is a discouraged child, I think you understand 50% of the positive discipline. It's but it is very difficult to understand that you want to provide a good place, a good situation for a child to learn to behave better and to learn whatever they have to learn. It's a learning process as well. So to take the child as a student instead of as somebody that has to learn the consequences in a negative way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some people think of that as giving reinforcement to a bad behavior. That's why they don't use it, right? Because they would think, okay, you are rewarding the misbehavior.
Right. And that would be addressing it, thinking of it as a reward for misbehavior and thus a reinforcement of continued misbehavior. That's thinking about it at the purely behavioral level. And we talked about the distinction last week between operating from a purely behavioral level in terms of trying to control and manipulate and change behaviors versus understanding really what's going on underneath those behaviors, what's motivating those behaviors, and how can we kind of change the motivation into a more positive direction.
That's right.
Yeah. And also I think it's important for us, sometimes as adults, I know I do, if I make a mistake or I do something I feel badly about, I very easily slip into that mentality of mentally beating myself up over it, feeling guilty, ashamed, all those kind of things. So it's important for us too to realize that just because we make a mistake doesn't mean that we are deserving of punishment, because I think we tend to punish ourselves for our mistakes. So if we as adults can get out of that mentality, then maybe it'll be easier for us to understand why it is that it might be okay for a child to have a positive timeout rather than a punitive timeout. Let's see, natural consequences. We talked a little bit about this last week. So a natural consequence is a child refuses to bring an umbrella outside with them when it's raining, despite all of our attempts to encourage them to do so. And they go outside and they get soaking wet, and then they're complaining that they're soaking wet. Well, there's your natural consequence. Yes, when you go out in the rain, you get soaking wet, and then you're not so comfortable. So allowing them to experience that discomfort. They'll probably, after a couple times of doing that, be more motivated to remember their umbrella, the next time. So that's an example of a natural consequence. And natural consequences are probably the most effective kinds of consequences. So any time that there's an opportunity to allow a child, I think, to experience the natural consequence of one of their choices, I think that's probably the ideal way for a child to learn, right?
Except for when they want to run across the street, that you have to say
Right.
no and
Right.
say no as many times as you want, because in that case,
Yeah.
you don't need to think about
Right.
positive discipline.
Right.
In certain situations, a no is a no, and that's all you need. No. If you have to, if it's a dangerous situation, right?
Right.
You can use that too.
Yeah.
It's
Disclaimer.
effective.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for chiming
When
in
you
with
need
that.
a quick, response for something that is not safe.
Right.
Yes,
Of course. Yeah. To distinguish between natural consequences and logical consequences is very important. And as we were talking about earlier, Jane Nelson is almost getting away from even using the term logical consequences because parents often mistake logical consequences and punishments. Those two often get confused, so it's really important to make the distinction. So a logical consequence is a consequence that still is created by the adults. I'm going to let you describe logical consequences. I think you can probably do it.
That's something, it's tricky, right, to realize, to try to understand what's a logical consequence and what's a punishment. So if you have this one here that we gave you last class, or if you did you have the time to read this chart here? I think it explains pretty well. So a natural consequence then is clear, right? Something that's going to happen naturally. You're telling a child not to climb on the table and they fall. Okay, that's a natural consequence too. Logical consequence is something that you're going to set up logically as a consequence for whatever is happening that you're telling the child not to do, right? And then the child will do. So in the chart it says the way to understand a logical consequence is that if it's related to the problem, if it's reasonable to you and to the child, and if it's respectfully enforced. So if the consequence has the 3 R's, it's a logical consequence. But because it's not easy to discern if it's a logical consequence or a punishment, then Jane Nelson is saying, let's just talk about solutions. So if it makes it easier for you, we can just talk about finding solutions. Right? That's a question you always have, Laura. I'm looking at you because
It's so hard.
I'll
sometimes it's hard
Yeah.
to.
I'll just give an example of what a logical consequence would be, so you have an idea. So keeping in mind the 3 things that it's that we set,
Reasonable.
that it's reasonable, that it's respectful, and that it's related to what's going on. So a logical consequence would not be you didn't do your homework, no video games for a week, because that's not related. Video games really don't have that much to do with the homework.
Yeah.
Well, unless
Yeah.
we'll just assume
most
for the
part.
moment they don't. For the most part, right? Exactly. So the consequence needs to be related directly to what is happening, and it needs to be set respectfully, and it needs to be reasonable. So for a 3-year-old, or for a kid not to have video games for 6 months, well, maybe that's kind of unreasonable, as opposed to today, no video games today. That's more reasonable. So. An example that always comes to me for some reason, I think it's because I use it at home with my 3.5-year-old, is that at bedtime, I'm trying to encourage him to kind of be more proactive, more cooperative, doing more his part for, going through the bedtime routine, right, and getting ready for bed on time. And I love reading books to him, but if we run out of time, if we don't kind of follow through with the routine, and so we run out of time for books, well, then the books don't happen because bedtime happens at a certain time, and so if there's not time for books, there's not time for books. To me, that's a pretty good example of a logical consequence. It's a consequence I've developed, so it's not natural, but it is directly related to the bedtime routine. I don't get, upset about it or angry about it. I'm just firm and kind in setting it, so it's respectful, and it's reasonable. He can deal with not getting books. He might be a little upset, but he's okay with it. So it follows all 3 of those R's.
So Jason just asked me before we started, what would you do in that situation? Sometimes with little kids, because they don't have any idea of the time, you need a timer. Somebody mentioned the timer, right? You need a timer, so you have half hour for them to get ready for bed, right? You set the timer, and then the first time, they may run out of time. The second day, they will realize, okay, I really have to take care of this, so then I can have my book, my book time.
Yep. And then I like the timer idea because then it's the timer's fault.
Yes. So you're not.
Timer said.
Yes. So that's one tool that you can use with little kids. It's very useful. But the routine chart, you wanted to talk about that, or did you mention something about the routine chart that you didn't do it, or
We did do it.
you did
I
do
obviously didn't follow it this morning because I wasn't on time now for the workshop,
Okay.
was I? But I
So
realized
did it work, or
I think it did work because just putting it down and writing it, how you just said it's the timer's fault.
yes,
Well, now it's the chart's fault,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
If somebody's not,
yeah,
following. And I realized it's time-wise impossible for me to get done everything that I think I'm going to get done before I have to walk out the door. So that's what we did. We decided what time we needed to leave and work backwards from there. And that's what the chart reflects. And
Yeah.
kind of ideas for doing things the night before or leaving things till later.
So
those
with
sorts
an
of
older
things.
child, you can work more with the time. But if it's younger, the child, then you can use images, just pictures. You can create a chart with them. And
Right.
say this is what we do, then after. And I was telling Jason that at the school, we have a principle that we use, to be on the same page with all of the teachers, and is that any activity that we do here is as important as the other activity, right? So if they are sweeping the floor, it's as important as if they are in the class time. If they are eating lunch, it's as important as going to play outside. So if you have that in mind, that everything that you do is important, and that what we expect from the child is to do his or her best at whatever activity they are doing, then you're not gonna feel that, he's not gonna go play outside because you're not gonna feel that that is more important. Of course it's important, but eating properly is important too, right? Or helping to clean up is as important as the lunchtime. And so keeping that in mind, I think helps also parents to understand that you're not giving them a punishment if they miss the book, reading a book. Because I think that was where your question came from today, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to say, okay, now I'm not gonna read you the book, although you know how important that is. But the rest is very important too.
Yeah.
So it's important to keep that in mind. Okay?
And it also matters if it's done reactively, then it comes across as more of a punishment. If it's not
Right.
something you've discussed ahead of time or
Yes.
planned ahead of time,
Yes.
then you're in exasperation and frustration, you're just like, okay, no books tonight. You know, that's a
right.
punishment.
That's
But
right.
if it's something you've established ahead of time and you've talked with your child about it and you let them know, then that's no longer a punishment. Then it's just the expectation, you know.
That's right. So the routine chart helps us too to decide, okay, what we
Yeah.
want to do about it.
Yeah.
And to have the feelings behind whatever we say are as important or more than what we do, right?
Right.
Is there a handout for the routine chart? Or text?
I don't know if I have one, but
Just when you
we
talk
can
about
actually go through now maybe, or you want to finish
Well,
the PowerPoint before we go around this circle too,
For the
for the questions.
we'll come back to we'll come back to routine charts because that's something that came up last week too. A couple people brought up the routine charts, so let's spend a little time towards the end talking about routine charts.
I don't know if we have a hand.
Keep remember that question. We'll come back to
I
it.
mean, I can figure what you do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Yeah, or
To
even
set
if
up
you do.
or- I
Yeah.
mean, how to create a routine chart, or what would you like to?
It depends
Well,
on the-
I can figure it out. I just wondered if you had an example or.
I don't necessarily have a structure
I don't
for it
think
set
we
up already,
have.
but
Yeah.
you know, I'm picturing for example, for 3 or 4 year olds, if evenings were difficult, right? You might set up a routine chart that was, like Laura said, mostly pictures, not a lot of words, but pictures.
For bedtime routine.
Yeah, for bedtime routine. So there might be a picture of a toothbrush,
Yeah.
and then a picture of pajamas, and then a picture of books,
Yeah.
right? And so,
I'm in a bed.
and then bed, yeah, right, exactly. And
Right.
so you keep it limited. You keep maybe 3, 4 things tops for a child of that age,
Yeah.
and maybe pictures would really be helpful. And then you can have it posted somewhere, maybe on the bathroom door or their bedroom door, and you can use that as a reminder. You can say, what does the chart, what does the chart say should be happening right now?
Yeah.
You know? So that would be an example of a chart for a very young child.
Okay.
You know? And then you can kind of, based on that, kind of adapt it and imagine what it would be like for an older child.
Yeah.
You could include more things. There would maybe be some words on there.
Yeah.
You could have Monday through Friday potentially, you know. So yeah. If there's still questions about that towards the end, we can come back to that. Regular special time, I think, is so important. It's something that I think that a lot of parents fail to find time for. You know, we live in a very busy, where most of us are very busy, today, and sometimes we don't even take small chunks of time for one-on-one, time with our kids with no distractions. But it's so important to maintain, for children to feel that sense of connection and belonging that they need in order to stay motivated, to want to do right and to want to do things well, and to stay feeling encouraged enough to do the right thing. They need to feel like they're important, and they need to feel like they are important enough that we spend a little bit of time with technology away, no distractions, where our attention is solely with them. And engage in something that they enjoy. So, and it doesn't have to be a long period of time, even if it's 10 minutes a day, or for an older child, if it's a half hour a week, if they know Friday afternoon, that's my special time with mommy, or that's my special time with daddy. But for them to know that it's important enough to be built into the schedule, that they are going to have that time.
We have a card for the routine charts, and then she suggests to, for example, take pictures of the child doing each task, and then using that for the routine chart. That's a good idea, right? For little ones, and then let the routine chart be the boss, like we suggested. And so you ask what is next on your routine chart, and do not take away from feelings of capability by adding rewards.
Oh.
Say that again?
Remember, positive discipline is not about rewards or punishments, okay?
Yeah.
So if you're
Yes.
using either one, you're not doing positive discipline.
Right, which sounds counterintuitive at first. It sounds counterintuitive at first that if you're not rewarding, that if you do reward, that's not positive discipline. Because we equate rewards with being positive, right? Rewards are a good thing, but it's actually right.
So we have these tools here. Look at all the tools you can use for positive discipline.
Okay, we talked about limited
I like
choice.
that flashcard set.
So we will, if we
Yeah,
have
it's
time,
a
we'll
good
pass
set.
them around, and then the issue that you want to present, you can then pull a card and see if it's going. We're gonna see if it's gonna work for that particular problem.
Mm-hmm.
We can do that. Do
Yeah,
you wanna
we talked about
find a
most
little
of this
basket
stuff.
or something where we can put the cards? Thank you. In the playroom, I think.
Yeah, another key point to the routine charts that you guys have been asking about is to create the charts with the child. So to have them be part of the process of creating it, even decorating it, really making it theirs, taking some ownership over it to get them to buy in. Mistakes as opportunities. A lot of these things we've kind of addressed, we talked about. So
It's almost 10:30, so
yeah, so let's get into let's move.
go around and ask for
Let's
answer
move.
questions or.
Yeah, let's move into specific questions and issues.
So if anyone, this is the problem-solving form that we were referring to here that is related to the mistaken goal chart. So did anyone do this homework in
I
particular?
didn't get that other one. I just
You
got the
did,
chart.
Leila.
I mean, I just answered the questionnaire.
So would you like to share or do you
Yeah.
want to?
Yeah, no problem.
We could start with this one then.
Okay.
It's related to the mistaken goal chart because this chart is very, very useful. It's not easy to understand at the beginning,
Yeah.
but it's super useful, right?
Yeah, so what we're going to do for the people online so they are aware of what's going on, what we're going to do is we're going to start with a particular challenging situation that has come up, and we're going to use the mistaken goal chart to figure out what the underlying motivation of the child may be, right, basically?
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
I have one more copy of the chart if anyone needs it. Actually, we can make more copies too, but it's very noisy.
Can I have that?
I gave this one last week. You can, or we can, do we have time to make more copies now? You don't have this one that we gave last week, or no?
I wasn't there.
here, I have an
Last
extra,
time.
you
We're
can have
not
this
here.
one.
So
We
you
have
can
that
have
one.
this one, and then we'll make copies. It's the only one I have though, so we'll make copies from this one then at the end of the
You
workshop.
share. Kathy and I can share.
Okay, and then we have one more, and then we can make any copy after when we finish,
I don't have it, but
if you want to.
between the two of us. Alright, so you want me to, I don't have the questions in front of me, but I do have the,
I have it here.
okay.
This one I actually have